Hello, I'm ABX2Cat and welcome back to another second channel video. Today I'm in Greenwich, London, which if you don't know is pretty much the centre of the world for reasons I'll go into later. But yeah, basically I figured by the way, I can't answer why I'm wearing a suit and a ridiculous hat today. That's a question I don't have time for because the sun is very quickly setting and you kind of need daytime for vlogs. But yeah, today I wanted to answer a question which I've been meaning to get to for a while now, which is why exactly when you look at a map, if you tried to map a spherical globe onto a flat plane, why is it that, you know, the north-south, easy enough to work out, North Pole, South Pole, everything else is in between there, but why did we decide that the very centre of the world should be placed roughly where the UK is? And although you can easily say like, oh, we invented the map and stuff, it gets actually a little bit more complex than that, and it raises so many more questions when you actually answer it, because the answer to that question is because time was invented right here. This right here is the very line which divides the world into east and west. Everything east of this point right here, again, Greenwich, London, or Greenwich Park, London to be more specific, everything east of this thing here is the east of the world, and everything west is called the west. That's why people say the Western world, which doesn't make much sense if you think of the world as a sphere, but on the map which we devised, the Western world is that way behind me right now, and the Eastern world is over there. I can pretty much tell you that we're pointing to like China right now behind me, and back there is like the US and Canada and stuff. But yeah, why is it considered the West and East from this point? Why did we decide that? That's why I figured I'd go through it with today's video. So, by the way, it's got some nice views that you can maybe look at in the background while I talk about all of this. So yeah, let's start with the very first bit of why we invented the maps to start right here in terms of East and West. And by the way, I ran past and he gave me the weirdest look, but basically, the reason we decided to do that is because time was invented here, which again, another one of those questions which is just like, so how did that happen? And also, time was invented literally, or like time as we know it today, was invented literally, under 150 years ago. How did we exist before then? Well, the simple answer to that question is time did exist long before then. We had, units of time, we had calendars, we had all that stuff long before then, but, 120 years ago, I think it was like 1896 when Greenwich Mean Time was first developed, I guess, it wasn't discovered. The reason that it didn't really bother anyone before then, and at least too significantly, was because if you think about the world has basically gotten really connected over the past 100 years, before then, as long as everyone in your immediate area that you could talk to has roughly the same time, it doesn't really matter, because as long as you're all saying, yeah, 5 is 5 and you meet at 5, that's just fine. What 5 means doesn't really mean too much, but basically every community had their own separate time, and it wasn't too big of a deal. If you're wondering how that even happens, basically every single major settlement, so city, town, etc., had a sundial, or basically a sundial, which basically could measure where the sun was, when the sun was at the very peak of the sky, where the sun would be if it wasn't 6 p.m. as opposed to midday, when the sun was at the very peak of the sky, that was when midday was decided, and every local place had what was called a local mean time. And again, this had no particular problems because everywhere was so far apart that, if it's, let's say it's 6 p.m. here in Greenwich, does it really matter if it's 5:46 in, let's say, Bristol? It doesn't really matter because it's going to take you much longer than 40 minutes to get there. However, and probably hours back in the 1800s and before, however, there's a couple of reasons that they needed to develop a kind of universal time that could kind of do stuff, and it was a very tricky thing to even really properly come up with, because basically the reason they needed this is they needed a way to kind of have a time which was stable across the world and to have something you could measure from, because obviously midday changes everywhere across the world, the peak of the sun, but you need somewhere to measure from so you can work out where you are as far as longitude goes. So hopefully I'm getting this right, but basically there are 2 coordinates on the Earth. Latitude is very easy to figure out. Apparently they've been able to do that for hundreds of years now. All you need to be able to do is work out the distance it goes one way versus the other. It's relatively easy to work out, so we've known how to get latitude for a long time. We can tell that the, for instance, the UK isn't the centre of the world as far as latitude goes because it's closer to the North Pole than it is the South Pole. However, longitude is something that was very tricky to work out because, they just didn't know a way to do it for the longest time. And again, it wasn't too problematic until, exploration started when you went across the sea and you had to go across like 5 or 6 time zones and you needed to know your rough location as far as that goes. And the reason you need to know that location, also a lorry left, but yeah, the reason you need to know that location is because obviously you need to be like, okay, how close are we to that settlement and are we going to the right place? Because obviously that's what you need to do. So what people just end up doing is, because they could never know their longitude, they never know how far they were going, they would just kind of guess it based on their approximate speed, and they'd go from the right latitude and just hope that got things right. And basically this was a horrible system. It means that ships were like being horribly inefficient, and meant a lot of them were susceptible to just fail because, weren't enough food for the things that happened. If there wasn't wind and there was problems, basically, yeah, you couldn't sail the most efficient route because you had no idea where you were. Think about how vast the ocean is to anyone who wants to sail across. Even today, with modern technology, it would be so hard to sail across that ocean. It took years, and if you have no idea what the time is and you're just measuring roughly midday, that means nothing. You have no idea where you are. So basically, yeah, for the longest time, this was one of the issues they were trying to solve. It took them hundreds of years to work out any way to solve latitude, at least successfully, because although, the time theory was developed a little bit, it never really kind of kicked off until basically the railways hit the UK in the 19th century. And UK, by the way, first place in the I believe they had the first railways in the world, at least the first successful railways. But yeah, basically, when railways took place, this meant that, let's say that distance again, like Bristol's 14 minutes behind, let's make it up. Well, if you can get there in like half an hour, that creates problems because the train needs to have a time, but if the train time is changing so much, then what's the problem there? And basically this plus the ship problem, which again, claiming lots of lives, making just sea travel inefficient. Basically, the solution they came up to here was discovered here at the Royal Greenwich Observatory, or made for the first time. It's hard to really say because it's really a concept of like, why don't we make the mean time here, so again, Greenwich Mean Time, what would have been before just the mean time for Greenwich, why don't we make that the time zone for the whole of the UK? So that means that if everyone eventually synchronizes their clocks here, which took a very long time, by the way, again, it was close to the end of the 19th century before everyone decided to actually synchronize the clocks here. Legal time was always local time for the longest time. It got weird, but why don't we make it so everyone syncs their clocks to right here, and then we can have a time zone which is solid for the whole of the UK, and also you can work out your mean time versus the mean time here if you have a clock on your ship which shows the mean time here, and you can use that to work out the distance, because obviously as you sail around the world, every 1/24th you go, the midday is an hour later. If you have a clock which says your time here, and you have a rough estimate of the time there, you can work out your 3 hours 26 that way, and therefore you're exactly halfway in the middle of the Atlantic, or something like that. And yeah, that's basically how people could work out their longitude. It was a really big deal, not only for sailing, but also for the railway, because then there was one time for everyone, and basically it was the start of standardized times of the world, and that is why the world starts here in Greenwich. And you might be like, but why didn't we ever change that? Because lots of places actually had their time set as like, or has their place and had their time set as like, okay, this is +1 to Greenwich, this is 1 hour east of Greenwich, or -1 to Greenwich, 1 hour west. I think I might have got that wrong. But basically they have their time set that way. And once you've done that, you've basically fixed the center of the world, which is Greenwich Mean Time, the thing everyone at the time, or most of the significant people at the time, were adhering their time to. And that is why Greenwich is the center of the world. And by the way, Greenwich, if you're curious, is in London. It's like in outer London. Behind me, the amazing view you can see, is the city of London. It gets really confusing. Whole video on that at some other point. But for now, all you need to know is that Greenwich is the center of the world, because this, at the Royal Observatory, even after, by the way, millions of pounds for rewards, was where they eventually discovered the solution that if we just have one time, make it the whole of the UK, and eventually Ireland and Portugal switch to it, have one time that's just kind of fixed, and then everyone kind of fixes their time to that within hour intervals, you can always work out roughly where you are longitude-wise, and for the longest time, that's how we did that. And it's kind of a cool thing if you ask me. So yeah, before I end today's video, as much as I'd love to tell you where I'm going to suit, time constraints and stuff, I figured I would just quickly mention, because on the way here to Greenwich, I didn't really expect it to be this far, because I'm meant to be back there somewhere right now. But basically, just a couple of weird stories. First of all, it's one of the outer towns of London, I guess you'd call it. Like, it's a part of London, but really it's its own separate place. Very interesting place, has its own university, has an ice cream store right outside the train station, so if you ever want to come here, maybe that's enough reason to do it yourself. And just the most ridiculous story that made me very sad is the fact that there's like a public bathroom, maybe like 5 minutes from the tube station, and obviously you need to go like, oh, isn't that great? And yeah, it's got that much liquid in the whole thing, and everyone was just standing in it. I've got these new shoes that I just bought in Poland, and now I feel like the worst ever. So there's a story I can't show anyone in real life, because then they'll look at my shoes and try to step away from me for a bit. And here you go, internet. Hope you all enjoyed that. So yeah, here is Greenwich, the center of the world. If I go a little bit this way, I'm in the east of the world. Wait, did I do that right? No, if I go that way, I'm in the west of the world. And if I go this way, I'm in the east of the world. So based on where you live and your time zone relative to mine, you can work out if I move towards you or away from you. And isn't that wonderful? So yeah, I hope you did all enjoy this video. Second channel, don't care. Goodbye. It's very tiring doing all the running to the left, apparently. So yeah, I'll see you all in some other video in the future. I don't know when this is being uploaded, by the way. But yeah, it's pretty late here. I'm going to rush to where I'm going to be going. And I'll see you. Bye. Second channel, don't care. That's the proper goodbye.